Hello everybody, Austin Hill Shaw here, founder of Creativity Matters and author of The Shoreline of Wonder on Being Creative. Today I'd like to talk to you about something that's really dear to my heart, and that is the Golden Gate Bridge. I live in Berkeley, and I have an office in Old Oakland. It's kind of near downtown Oakland, but a little bit separated in an old Victorian hotel from the 1890s. But the benefit of being in the East Bay, the so-called East Bay, is that I have the opportunity to look out over at San Francisco and the Golden Gate on almost a daily basis. It's an incredible landmark. It's absolutely beautiful. And its power is kind of amazing. First of all, just the opening itself seems to be, just have some incredible quality to it. It's almost indescribable. But if I was to pick one single feature of the Bay Area that I thought contributed the most to the creativity and the innovation that you see here, I would have to pick the Golden Gate itself as that single thing. And the reason for that is because it mitigates between the finite San Francisco Bay and the seemingly infinite Pacific Ocean, right? And every day you see large cargo ships coming in and there, out of there, going to the port of Oakland. And of course, there's the movement of the tides and the wind. In the summertime, we have that fog pouring through there. It's just an incredible place. It's very dynamic. You get a sense that it's connected to all parts of the world. And it has this sort of mystery and mystique about it. Okay? So, of course, during the Depression, this bridge happened to be realized, which is called the Golden Gate Bridge, which is reputed to be the most photographed structure in the entire world. And it is incredibly beautiful. It has these Art Deco details on it. It's orange in color. And there's just something about it, especially from the East Bay in the morning when the sun is hitting, it just looks magical. And also from my look, it looks almost impossible. You know, it's such a big opening and such a wide span. You can see the camber of the bridge. It's endlessly fascinating to me. So today I want to talk about the origins of the Golden Gate Bridge and how they relate to the 5 qualities of creative insight. So creative insight is that aha moment that we've all had in our lifetimes, where suddenly we have a glimpse of a possibility that we never thought possible. Or perhaps we're working on a project, we've been working on something for a long time, we reach an impasse, and then suddenly something comes into our consciousness that just was not there before. And it almost feels like it comes out of left field. So, in order to understand the origins of the Golden Gate Bridge, we have to go back to Ohio, to 1889, where there was a young man named Joe, who was 19 years old at the time, and decided he was going to go out for football practice. He was a sophomore at the University of Cincinnati, and he wasn't necessarily good football material. He stood just over 5 feet tall. Okay? And the other thing that was going on for Joe is that he was Jewish at a time of rampant anti-Semitism. And as the story goes, Joe walked out on the field, and before tryouts even began, he was brutalized. Totally brutalized by the other players out there. Story goes that they might have even used him as a football in a certain way. But whatever happened to Joe, I mean, he was battered so badly that he ended up in a hospital for 2 weeks, in and out of consciousness. Well, this hospital happened to be on the banks of the Ohio River. And Joe's bedroom window happened to be looking out over the Ohio River and a suspension bridge known as the John A. Roebling Suspension Bridge, which at the time it was built was the longest suspension bridge in the world. And we don't totally know what was going on in those 2 weeks, but we can imagine that something was going along in Joe's mind. Perhaps he was saying to himself, I'm probably not going to be a very good football player, but I might be a good bridge builder. Okay? Because this Joe would go on to be Joseph Strauss, who was the chief designer and engineer of our beloved Golden Gate Bridge. Okay? So, what does this have to do with the experience of insight? Well, we can start to see how Joe's experience of being in that hospital bedroom, he didn't choose to be there, believe me. Nobody chooses to be brutalized. But somehow he ended up in this place and received the most important message of his life. At least for all of us in the Bay Area. I mean, people come from all over the world to see this bridge because it is so beautiful. And it was realized by this person who had his key moment of insight for his life in a hospital bed when he was 19 years old. So let's just look at what these qualities of insight, creative insight are, and how they relate to Joe's experience. The first quality of creative insight is that it is ineffable. Ineffable is just a fancy word for an experience beyond words, right? We've all had things like that where we experience the world in a certain way, and if you asked us to actually articulate it, we have trouble doing something. But it's powerful. We can sense that this is powerful, but it's beyond words. In religious sects, they would call this a mystical experience, right? It's an opening up to something much larger than yourself. In the world of artistry, we would think of this as inspiration. It's that moment of something coming and rushing into us, right? And in the world of science, this is the sort of thing that generates an hypothesis, okay? So, ineffable is the first quality. The second quality of creative insight is accompanied by a sense of absolute truth. Again, we can't necessarily describe what we're going through, just in the same way perhaps Joseph Strauss, when he was 19 years old, wouldn't necessarily be able to articulate the experience he's having with that bridge outside, right? But there was something about it that gave him a profound sense of direction, of absolute truth. It's like, I need to go in this direction. Does that make sense? So again, first of all, we have the ineffable, then we have the absolute truth. All right? The next aspect of this is that typically these experiences are brief. All right? Creative insights typically are brief. They can be like a micro moment to a few moments to maybe an hour, a couple hours, sometimes days, but rarely longer than that. This is the part of the creative process. Again, that aha moment is brief. Boing, it gives you a sense of where you're going, right? And then it's the task of the creator to carry that out over time, to carry it out over time. Okay? But so the creative insights tend to be brief. Fourth quality is that they also tend to be passive. Okay? The experience of insight is an experience of something coming to us. I mean, think of Joseph Strauss, 19-year-old on the hospital bed, in and out of consciousness. He was probably in the most compromised state of his life. And he probably didn't have his so-called wits about him. He probably couldn't even feed himself on certain days. There were probably doctors and nurses in and out of the room all the time caring for this person who was sort of hanging on for his life in a certain way. And yet, in that moment where he's totally helpless, this creative insight starts to come rushing in. Okay? Finally, the creative insights typically they take place in one place and one place alone. Is that is in the individual. Creative insights occur within the minds of individuals. For example, two people might go up to the rim of the Grand Canyon, and one might have an experience of a transcendental opening based on the grandeur of the space, while the other person might have an experience of, not as cool as something else, right? They're looking at the same thing at the same time, and yet they're having radically different experiences. So the important thing about creative insights is they do occur in the minds of individuals. And this is really important because they occur in my mind, they occur in your minds. And since there is only one of you in the world, and there will only be one of you in the history of all humankind, and because there will never be anyone quite like you, your lens on the world is incredibly precious. Incredibly precious. Okay? So, and as we know, within this project called The Golden Gate, this person named Joseph Strauss, who had this individual experience of creative insight, that he might be a great bridge builder, he had the fortitude, the will, the drive, and the inspiration in order to actually make it happen. Okay? Again, he was the designer and chief engineer of the Golden Gate Bridge. So, what can we take away from all this? What can we start to learn from this experience of creative insight? The first thing that I would say, that most of us in the modern world, with emails and phone calls coming at us and all this information coming at a rapid rate, we don't often leave spaces, we don't leave openings and gaps for us to have new things, new experiences to come into our lives. We're so busy keeping ourselves busy with information that we don't necessarily leave the space for creative insight. So the first thing I would say is that it's important for us to actually create gaps within our days. What I like to call the daily dose of death. Something that we do, perhaps it's just sitting and meditating for a short period of time. Perhaps it's going for a walk. Perhaps it's writing in for a journal for a little bit, for no particular reason, just to emote. Perhaps it's lighting a candle and just speaking what's going on for us and then sitting in silence. We need to do things, especially with all the information that we have running around our heads, to create gaps in what it is that we're doing. The second thing that I would suggest is that we start to value ourselves as individuals and as creators. So many of us don't see ourselves as particularly creative. We view it as a gift that somebody else has, but not necessarily that we do. So it's important that we do things to start recognizing that we have value, that the things that we're bringing to the world have value. Because I'm sure that there's a lot of creative insights that have happened in the world, in people's minds, that they haven't necessarily acted upon because they've said to themselves, oh, that's not important. Okay? Like, what if Joseph Strauss is like, well, that's a stupid idea. Maybe you need just to go work out a little bit harder and try out next year for football. Okay? Right? We do things for all sorts of different reasons. But the more we can recognize that our lens on the world is unique and that we are here to bring our gifts into the world, we value ourselves as individuals. In other teachings, I'll talk about how important it is also to value the collective. But for creative insight, it's really important that we value ourselves as individuals. And finally, the last thing that I'd say is that it's important that we start to develop some sense of comfort with things that we don't necessarily know. Okay? There's a saying in Zen Buddhism, which is basically, not knowing is most intimate. Not knowing is most intimate. What does that mean? It means we're in the space of curiosity, when we're in the space of wonder, when we're between ideas that it's this way or that way, that's often where our creative insights come from. They don't necessarily come from really solidly formed ideas. Okay? They come from those spaces where we feel a tiny bit lost, or perhaps off kilter, or like leaning out of our comfort zone, those are the places that we start to find and discover creative insights coming towards us. Okay? Lots of the stories of heroes and myths are about people going out. Something goes wrong in their lives and they go out into the world in the sense of like, I don't know what's going on right now. And in that moment, an experience of insight is inserted into our minds, okay? Just inserted that way. It's happened to me. I'm sure it's happened to you. I've had these many times, and I'm going to share those sometime for you in other presentations, okay? But anyways, I hope this is of value to you. I hope it allows you to appreciate, if you live in the Bay Area, that you appreciate that Golden Gate and the Golden Gate Bridge that crosses it. And I also hope it allows you to recognize that even though this is one thing happening in a particular part of the world, that it's actually a universal experience, right? We, as human beings, we have creative insights. We are the species right now that doesn't just change our lives via genetic mutation, but through neuroplasticity, the constant rewiring of our brains. We have that capacity. It's amazing. And creative insight is the thing that allows us to do that. So anyways, I hope this was useful to you. This is Austin Hill Shaw, reminding you to connect deeply, to make a difference, and to inspire creativity in others. Thank you.